Yeah, so Chrome DevTools. When I was coming up with these slides, so I asked you to, kind of enumerate some of these tips and tricks that I do on a day-to-day basis, and we kind of learned as a front-end team, the ins and outs of Chrome DevTools. That I spend a lot of time looking at this. Probably, I look at this more than anything else, and I think it speaks to the fact that, yeah, sure, I write code, but most of the time, I'm just trying to figure out why the fuck my code doesn't work, right? And this has come a long ways. Compared to days like in IE6 or whatever, you only had alert to, help you out. This is a fantastic tool. And a little bit of my background, I started out my career at IBM, working on the back end, mostly working inside of Eclipse, developing Eclipse plugins, Eclipse applications. And so I was really used to having this, the idea of the IDE, the integrated development environment. And when I shifted over to doing more front-end JavaScript work, it was like this, oh my gosh, I've lost all this capabilities. I can't easily move between different files. I can't get information. So anywho, I put together these slides, and most of it is just, again, a random collection of things that I do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm going to try to couple it with some related problems so that maybe it will be a little bit easier for you to remember, like when should I use this one feature? Oh, I'm trying to solve this particular problem. So I know there's a few of you that probably spend just as much time as I do, and hopefully you can pick up something. But okay, so let's just dive right in. Well, first off, Chrome DevTools is very, very beautiful. I'm not going to be able to cover it, so I'm just going to grab some handful of features, mostly on elements and sorts and console panels. So let's start out with the elements panel. Okay, first quick tip is quickly inspect. Oops, we got a typo. So there's a couple ways that you can, well, I mean, a lot of times we get into the situation where we see a problem with our web app and we just want to quickly zero in on it. And there's a couple ways you can do that. You can do the Alt-Command-J. That's a hotkey. I don't know what it is on Windows. I think it's Control-Shift-J or I. J. Click on this inspect for the magnifying glass or whatever, and then you can click, and then you have narrow down your problem. You know exactly which DOM element has the issue. Another way you can do it is you can right-click and inspect that element, and that should give the same result. But there's yet another way, and that's Command-Shift-C. That immediately drops you into inspect. And what's kind of neat about this, and I think it's a little bit better than the other approaches, is because you're immediately in inspect, you get the little hover of what exactly you're selecting, because it might be some deeply nested node, and so you get this little highlight to indicate that you selected the right thing. So let's go ahead and fix that. Awesome. Problem solved. So while we're in the elements panel, let's talk about style. So we might get some requirement like this, where below we see hello world in white, and we're asked, okay, let's style the hover case for it. So when you hover over it, it should look like on the right. Ooh, it's kind of nasty on there, but it's in red. You get a border of red as well and black background. So the first thing you might want to know is, well, where do I style this? Or what file is associated with this? And Chrome DevTools does a pretty nice job of helping you out there. Once you've selected that DOM element in the Elements panel, over here on the right where you see all the different styles, you can also see where it's coming from. And here it's coming from this particular file. I'm going to cover source maps in a minute, but let's just assume that, okay, we have that file. We're going to open that up in our editor and start styling this. So one kind of complication with styling like interactive elements is that you actually have to interact with it. You have to actually put it in the state so that you can actually see the styles that you're applying. So the workflow or the development flow will be something like this. Okay, so you've created your selector that isolates that element, and it's going to only be applied on hover. So let's start out with making the color red. So save that. I've got live below going, and over here, and I hover. Okay, it's red. Good. Background color black. Second. Okay. So there's a lot of like back and forth, and it'd be nice to be able to just say like, can we just force this element into the hover state? And development tools can help you out there. It's probably not the greatest icon, but I can't think of any other better icon. So once you have it selected, right at the top with this dotted border and the cursor, you can force that element into hover state. So now, as you're applying styles, you don't have to shift from your editor and back and forth. And, it'll save you some time. And finish it off with some border radius. So now we have something kind of close to what it's supposed to look like. And we did it relatively quick. And when you want to turn that off, you just go back to Chrome Dev Tools and uncheck that. And then you double check the work. So when you hover over it, it looks exactly like the requirement asked for. So as a sub-tip, and I did create a special slide, but how many of you are using like a CSS preprocessor like SAS or less? Yes, good job, Brian. Okay, cool. So for those of you who don't know, there are some huge benefits of using a CSS preprocessor. So it's the idea that you can code in a different CSS language, I guess you could put it that way, to allow for like nesting, variables, certain features that aren't available in CSS. And that gets compiled down to regular CSS so that any browser can look at. Now, because these CSS preprocessors have become wildly popular, Chrome Dev Tools has created some features that integrate a little bit better with these preprocessors. And I'm using one right now. So you might have noticed that this isn't exactly CSS. It has like this nesting. Right? You can't have a CSS rule and another rule. So that's something in SAS, CSS preprocessor. But with this workflow, can have some complications. Now you have to compile it, and then in DevTools you're looking at the compiled CSS. How do you map that back to your original SAS file? You know, this original source. And I don't know when they added this, maybe a couple months ago, but now they have source maps built in for CSS and JavaScript. And so on the left-hand side, you notice, okay, where my cursor is, it points directly to the source file. So not the generated CSS, but the SAS file. So when you click on it, it also loads up in the sources panel the SAS file, the original. Oops, I guess you can't really see the cut off. So I think that's really neat. Now this presupposes that you have that type of support in your CSS preprocessor. In SAS, and I believe SAS, they have those built in. You can generate source maps, and you can have this wonderful flow.
Do you have to do any setup to use maps, or it's the
I think you still do. Yeah, okay. So under this gear, sorry, thank you. Let's click on that gear, and you scroll down to sources. You have to enable both of these. And I don't think they're enabled by default. I think I had to check that out. But I've had it on so long that it might be default by now. So yeah.
How does it know where the source files are?
How does it know the source files? It kind of relies on whoever So in the case of SAS, that the SAS compiler generates the source maps that point to the correct file. And it's also to be said that you need to make those source files available. So like if you're running in a web server, you got to make sure that your web server is hosting those files as well. Okay.
Hey Peter.
Yeah, what's up?
What version of Chrome are you using?
I'm using Canary.
Can you talk about that?
So, there are a couple of different channels or flavors of Chrome that you get. Canary is, I think, bleeding edge. Like it gets updated every night, and so one great thing about using that is you get to use some of these cool features ahead of time before it lands in stable. So stable, I believe, which I mean, if you regularly download Chrome, you'll get stable, and I think that one updates every 6 weeks. I believe there's a new version every 6 weeks on the cycle. So you know, maybe you hear about some really interesting, cool Chrome Dev Tools feature, and you might have to wait 6 weeks, but you can use Chrome Canary, and you get it the next time. So that's one cool thing about Chrome Canary.
How is Canary different? I'm using the Chrome Dev channel. Is that the same thing?
I think it's the same thing.
Because I don't think I get an update nightly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes it just updates so silently. That's the way Chrome works.
Okay.
You might not see the little green thing over here. That
I'm wondering if Canary is the nightly and Dev channel is like when it graduates out of Canary, and then after it graduates Dev, it goes to production.
Yeah, I know
I'd have to look into
there's
that.
another one. I thought it was called Beta, but I've never used it. I just use Canary or Stable.
Okay.
Yours looks different than mine, but you're on a Mac and I use Windows, so I'm not sure. Like I have an overrides. They just changed the override stuff in mine like 2 days ago.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if that you've had it for a while. If you had,
Oh yeah, I've had it for a while.
then yeah, I'm on a different channel. Though.
So yeah, look into Chrome Canary. Stay tuned.
Is it generally usable?
What's that? Surprisingly.
Yeah, it's.
But when it does fail, then you're like, oh, why does it break? And then you're like, oh well, yeah, I'm on a Mac.
But you can install both.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I've been using Chrome Canary as my default on and off for the past year and a half, and for the most part, it's pretty good. There was one day, like a year ago, where a bunch of backbone sites just mysteriously broke, and one of those sites actually said, "Oh, you must be using the Chrome Canary," and they pointed the bug. I was like, "I'm impressed."
Okay, what else? Oh, okay. So here's an interesting problem that you might find yourself in. Okay, so you may be new to the code, or you haven't looked at a piece of code for a while, and you might be asked to fix this particular problem. Why is hello world like blinking red? It should be blinking blue, or whatever, right? And if you didn't have certain tools like Chrome Dev Tools, this might be a really challenging problem where it might take you a while to get through the code, try to find the word red, or find hello world, or find, there's a bazillion ways that this, some JavaScript could actually be doing this. But one really neat feature in Chrome Dev Tools is adding breakpoints whenever a DOM node gets manipulated, when an element gets manipulated. So let's try that out. So, okay, here's the div in question, and we can see in the bottom left that it's changing every second or two from white to red. And we want to know like who's doing that, right? So that we can fix the code. Okay. So if you right-click on that node, and you have a couple of options. You can insert a breakpoint when a child or a descendant is modified, an attribute gets modified, or the node itself gets removed. In this case, we're wanting to break when the style attribute is modified, so that's an attribute. So let's do an attribute modification, and bam! Immediately, whenever that attribute changes, we're going to get a breakpoint. And when we hit this breakpoint, we immediately got brought into the source panel, and we see the offending code right here. And so we're in find element changes.js, and we see that this code is setting the style attribute from red to white. So I think this is I've had to use this a couple of times, and it just saves me a boatload of time. So trying to figure out some JavaScript code, or try to blindly look through some JavaScript code, trying to find the word red or something like that. So yeah, it's one new feature. So while we're in, okay, so while we're talking about JavaScript, let me remove that breakpoint.
Now, it also appears that you have access to the call stack, so that, you should be able to go up another level. You say, who called this little helper routine?
That is a great segue.
I was wondering if you were going. Yeah.
Understood.
Well, actually, no, that's too slow. Okay. But, okay, we'll get there. We'll get there, yes. Yeah. So, right now we're in source panel because we saw some code that was modifying it, and that's where our breakpoint took us. So, let's kind of look at some features inside the sources panel. A lot of times I find myself navigating through different files and trying to find my way through a source file. And let's take a look at an example of this. So we're going to try to find the magnify function inside of zoom.js. And sure, inside the sources panel, you can flip this guy open and you can try to find the zoom.js file. But there's a better way. And the better way is this, is that you hit Command-O, and you start typing the file that you want to go to. And it's, I believe it was kind of modeled after Sublime Text Editor or Vim Fuzzy Finder, this idea that you can immediately jump to any file. It doesn't have to be inside the current working directory. It could be in some deeply nested directory. And you can even screw up on the spelling. You just type zim.js and it still picked it up. That's kind of nice. And hit enter and you're there. Now while you're inside of the file, you can jump directly to a function or some property by just adding shift. So Command Shift up and start typing in magnify. And we see that we have two functions, and what's kind of nice of Chrome DevTools is it provides the argument list so that you can figure out which one you want. And then bam, right there. So that's one quick way of kind of navigating through a lot of source. So the next thing that Ralph was talking about is kind of getting more information while you're in this debug state. Right? You go up to call stacks and whatnot. So let's get into a debug mode. So kind of using the same skills that we just learned in the previous tip. Let's try to find a function A and controlling the debugger.js. So let's JS for A. There we go. Let's put a breakpoint right here. And we're going to click this text, and this should call A. Okay. So now we're in at a breakpoint, and we can see basically all the information about during its runtime. But right now, if we just pause time, what is the value of A1, value of A2, and A3? And also, we can kind of move forward in time at a controlled pace. So we could use these buttons on the right-hand side, or we could use some hotkeys. Because I'm more of a keyboard person, and I think it's a little bit faster. So you might feel the same way. So once you're in this at this breakpoint mode, you can step over by doing Command single quote. So we just stepped over that console.log. If we want to step into this function called B, we'll just do Command semicolon. So right now we're inside, we've jumped into B. Oops. Let's prevent that. This gets cut off. So this is a little bit. Okay, good. And we can continue to dive in. Another interesting thing is also about getting information from the stack. So we've gone into a nested call all the way to C. So C was called by B, and B was called by A. But we might be interested in knowing, back when A had called B, that called C, what was the value of A1? And over here we have this call stack that you can click on to do that, or you could use a hotkey as well. On the Mac, it's Control, comma, or period. Go to period. So you can easily jump up the stack, and you can see what A1 was. Or you can go back down to level B and see what B1 was. So yeah, just some helpful hotkeys that might save you some time. Okay, so now in this example, we noticed that there have been some console log statements, and so that's obviously going to be logged somewhere. So that gets logged over here in the console table, but it might be kind of tough, like always bouncing back and forth. So you're in the sources table. Okay, let's step over this. Okay, let's jump back to the console. But there is a console sidebar or bottom bar that is available to you everywhere. So if you hit escape, you'll see that you have access to the console while you're in the sources panel. And you can do this just about everywhere. So even in the elements, whatever panel that you're in, you can still have access to the console. And this can be incredibly useful, especially when you're debugging, where you're at a breakpoint, and now you want to like interrogate. Oh, sorry, you can't see it slightly. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So while you're at this breakpoint, you want to drop it to the console and execute some code to say, okay, what is C1? What's the state of window, for example? And so that's one great thing of having the console always available. And while we're talking about the console, there are some really cool things. So it's not just a place where you can execute any arbitrary JavaScript, but there are some convenience methods that are available on the console to make your life a little bit easier. Whether it's like finding elements or copying and pasting. Let's take a look at a few of those. Okay. So there's three that I tend to use quite a bit, mostly around just JavaScript debugging. And so the first one, okay, so on the bottom, I've loaded up some example data, and it looks like this. And so it's attached to window, it's called example data. There's an attribute called campaigns, and it's an array that has all these different objects that have like a name, an agency ID, and the UUID. So let's play around with those while we're in the console. So the first one is $_ and what that gives you is the previous result. So let's say we did 5 plus 7 here, something silly. We can easily access that result by just doing $. So it's always the previous result that you have, and it could be something pretty long, like some big generous query or whatever. But you can, in 2 characters, you can get that result back.
Pearl never dies.
Looking at this example data that I have loaded for this slide, we have example data. Inside example data, we have campaigns, we have an array of things, and so this might be an example of you're getting this huge gobs of data from the back end, right? And you want to look something up based off of, say, UUID, right? Now you can copy this like this, or you can use a nice copy command that immediately puts whatever you pass to it into your clipboard. So now when you paste, it's there. And so working with big UUIDs, or you could do something like this, body, inner, HTML. I'm just going to copy the whole dang thing. And then boom, you paste the source. Right? If you want to do something crazy like that. So.
Oh, totally fit on that phone.
So the last one I find a lot of utility out of is console.table. So looking at our example data, we have all these different campaign objects, and you might want to try to compare them. And so you display it, and then you expand each of these objects. And you know what? This is not necessarily the best way to kind of visualize and try to compare, let's say, agency ID. Are they all the same? I don't know. So if we run console.table and we pass in an array, so table, pass an array, it creates a beautiful table. And even better yet, it's interactive. So you can sort. In this case, we have a bunch of campaigns. So which one is the earliest campaign, for example? Also, maybe you're not interested in all the different fields, so you can pass it in as a second argument, an array of just attributes that you want to look at. So let's just look at name and start date. Again, it's all interactive. So it's a little bit easier to, maybe compare like big gobs of data that might be locked into some JavaScript object.
That's some cool stuff. I could really use that.
Eden?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just asked really quick. Are any of these console commands available outside the console? And are there any hooks for any of those?
Actually, I don't know. I think console.table might be available. Like if you wrote it in your JavaScript, like you might be able to execute that. I'm not sure.
Only in Chrome, probably.
But yeah, oh yeah, definitely only in Chrome, probably. Or yeah.
The copy, does that have to be a DOM element, or could that be an expression as well?
Oh yeah, that can be expressed. It's just like
That's pretty cool.
just anything they can pass to a function.
Sure.
And I think it just runs toString if it's not. So.
So you could do copy 7 plus 12 or something.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's very cool.
The copy works in Chrome only also?
I believe so. I don't know if that's part of Firebug. I don't think that's part of IE developers tools. I kind of spent too much time on IE stuff. Okay, what else is there? So those were kind of the secret console commands that are related towards JavaScript, but we spent a lot of time with our visual stuff, being the elements, these dominoes. So there's a set of these. Okay, let me clear them. Can you guys still see that? Okay, I'm going to be working off of this kind of example where we have this scrolling pane and it's got a bunch of foobar bases in it. So let's take a look at what is this? How does it fit inside the DOM? So it's in the scrolling pane, being this div, and it's really just a bunch of divs with classes of foo, bar, and baz. Inside the console, you can access these. You can do what is available to any web app, at least for IE 9 or above, and most modern browsers using query selector. And you can pass in a CSS selector, like so, and you get foo. You get the very first one that's encountered in the tree. But those kind of tool guys, thought it might be a little bit quicker. I think this is directly ripped from Firebug. It's a capital $sign. And so you do the same thing, but less keystrokes, and you've got foo. $, will give you all of them. So we have quite a lot of different foo class divs. You get the whole array. Now, maybe that's good enough, but sometimes, once you get this list of divs, you might wonder, like, well, how does, like, this one, like, fit into the DOM tree? So, like, for example, like, the fifth one, right? You can call inspect. Here's another command that you can run. You pass it a DOM node, and if it exists inside the DOM tree, it'll automatically select it. And you might have not noticed it because it happened pretty quick, but it shifted my selection from the very first one down to what was the fifth foo in that array. And so that is sometimes kind of interesting. Like you're stuck at a breakpoint, you know this one variable has a DOM node, and you want to know, is it even on the document, and where does it live on the document? Kind of going the opposite direction, maybe you're in the elements panel and you've selected something, and now you want to play with it, and that's $0. So that is your current selection in the elements panel. Thank you. I've been looking for that forever. So yeah, that's really helpful to be able to do that. Now you might notice that Chrome does something interesting. When it like detects like whether it's a DOM node, it's going to print it out not just as like a plain old object, but as if it's like an HTML interactable thing. So for example, that's what I mean. Like the Chrome Dev tools could have just printed out like a string saying div, but this is like actually interactive, which is kind of cool. So, but maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you want to know, like, treat it more like a JavaScript object and get like attribute information, just as you would like if you handed it. Whoops. Like this, so that you can actually see all the different attributes and all the different values, because a DOM node has a lot of complexity to it. So you can run the dir command on it. So we still have this div tip example selected, so that's what $0 is going to be. And now what you see, it gets rendered a little bit differently, more like an object, and so now you have access to kind of like all these JavaScript properties and all its values, and so that's also something I found very useful sometimes. Okay, and now this one, okay, this last one, monitor events, is kind of an oddball. I don't use this too much, but boy, when I need it, I'm glad it's there. So, for example, if we select this div, which is the scrolling pane that holds all the blue bar passes, you can run monitor events, 0. And what that's going to do is it's going to log to the console every single HTML event that this thing is emitting. So right when you hover over it, these are all the mouse move events. These are all the scroll events, mouse wheel events. And I find this sometimes useful, like when I'm developing like a new widget or whatever, and I want to know a particular interaction. And so I'll perform that particular interaction on a monitored element, and so I can see like what events can I key in on. You know, can I always depend on a click? Can I always depend on like a mouse move or whatever? And so, and also like kind of debugging issues too. An example of this might be like I have an input element, and as I'm typing, like the focus gets taken away, and so I really like to know like what's blocking this focus event. Why is it out? So having all these events being monitored, I get a little bit more insight on that. So,
How do you turn it off?
what's that?
How do you turn it off?
Oh, you can unmonitor events.
Oh, okay.
And then it's off. Or you could just hit refresh. Okay. Okay, for the next one. I love the timeline. This timeline panel is probably the best thing since sliced bread. So now this is more towards finding performance problems, which can be particularly take a long time to try to figure out what's going on. It's not necessarily that a particular requirement is being broken. It's not that like this is red and supposed to be blue. It's just something's a little bit slow, you know, and that could be because a bunch of things are happening, or maybe just one thing that's sucking up a lot of time. And so the timeline is a great tool for such. So in this example, we have a scrolling, and oh man, it's janky. Right? So look at the other one. Whew, nice and smooth. Right? So what's doing that? Right? So I mean, like without tools, I don't know what I would do. Right? I'd just be printing a bunch of stuff and maybe date.now and see like the biggest difference of date.now. But Chrome Dev Tools to the rescue. So if we bring up the timeline and we start recording, okay, first off, there are like basically 3 views into this data. I'm going to set it to frames, which I think is probably the most useful. So we set this up, we start recording, and it's going to record basically anything that's occurring, like on the page. Right? And so we can start to scroll up, and down. Okay. So what are we looking at? So since we have the frame view selected, each of these bars is a whole frame. That includes rendering, you're executing any type of JavaScript, and let me do this again, but with less bars. So it's a little bit easier to see. So this gives you insight on a frame where we try to scroll and what was the browser trying to do, or what was the browser doing. And you see here that it also very recently has a breakdown with this nice pie graph saying that we spent 49, almost 50 milliseconds, and most of it was in JavaScript, right? There's some of it was for rendering, some of it was painting and other stuff. I don't know what other stuff means, right? Which is kind of neat. But also on top, on this horizontal area, it gives a really quick indication of, where do you have problems, right? So the name of the game for getting nice smooth scrolling and getting great performance is making sure that all these bars are under 60 frames per second, as low as possible, right? And so using a tool like this can really quickly identify, like, where is your problem? Do you have a problem, first off? Maybe you start scrolling and it seems kind of smooth, or maybe not so smooth, but you notice that all the bars are under 60 frames per second, then you're good to go. But then you notice something like this, where the bar is well over 60 frames per second. That's why it feels janky, or whatever. Then you can start to dig into it. So let's try to figure out what's going on here. So below, we get kind of like a more waterfall view of all the different things that are occurring instead of like an aggregation of time. So this is more of a breakdown of exactly what's going on. Pull this right up too. Move this over here. So we want to see the start of this big yellow bar. What triggered that from the beginning? Okay. So we see that there is this event that occurred at school. And that kind of makes sense. We were trying to scroll and then edge hits that. So we break that out, and here it's kind of amazing to see like how much stuff is occurring in just like in your JavaScript code, and how many in this particular example, like how much like memory is being created or deleted. You can immediately click on the function call. So this is like what happened on that scroll line. And it'll take you straight to whatever was causing our jank. So here we're just like pushing a bunch of shit, right? So I made this purposely, so that it's pretty night and day, to try to eat up some JavaScript time, right? But even with this same setup, without the tool, it might take you a while to find this problem. So I search for all the scroll events in my source file, then I try to narrow it down, whatever. But with this timeline tool, it tells you exactly where your problem is occurring. There's a lot more features that you can get, or a lot of other pieces of information. I'm not going to go too deep into it just because I didn't have time to create slides for it. But definitely something that you should investigate, especially if you're looking into performance issues. Now, I don't have slides for these two things, but I think they're really cool and something to be aware of. And the first is flame charge. And both of these are more performance related as well. So kind of like in our example here, we know that JavaScript is sucking up all the time. But this was pretty easy to spot because, once we looked at the code, we saw that it's just being stuck in this tight loop and doing something like a bunch of times, right? But sometimes it may not be very clear. It's not located in one spot. It's not just one tight loop or whatever. It might, the problem might be in like getting called on many different functions, and it's because you're calling these functions many times in different ways, right? So let's see. have. Okay, let's use this. Okay, so on the profile panel, so after you've narrowed down that you have like kind of like a JavaScript problem, you can start to profile your JavaScript by going to Profiles, selecting Collect JavaScript Profile, and start collecting data, and then maybe perform whatever is causing jank or is less performant. So I'm just going to do some slide movement, and hopefully that'll generate some data that I can use. Okay. So once you've done that, okay, in Canary, I noticed that the default view is now the flame chart, and this is what's really cool. Before you kind of got this view that wasn't particularly helpful. It just said, like, during your profile, I've aggregated all the time, and you spent most of the time in anonymous function. Well, thanks. Not at all, right? But this flame chart is way more useful because it still kind of maintains that time component. And let me regenerate it again because there's a huge pause. So let's do that. And then okay, stop. You can see these big spikes. It's a lot more visual, and you can start to zoom in those spikes. And given what we were doing, most likely this is probably because I was shifting between different slides, and you can kind of get some insight on what's going on when I move to from one slide to another. Okay, so let's say we zoom in on this, and so this view on the bottom kind of shows kind of a breakdown. For at this time, you spent so much time here, and you start out with a function called, and unfortunately, this is mostly because it's minified code, so that's the name of the function is called WB. So WB was called, and then WB ended up calling QB, and QB ended up calling Q. But what's neat about this is it shows you very visually like how much time got sucked up at each level, right? So that you might be able to gain some insight in saying like, okay, I wasn't expecting this, and you would probably do this on non-minified code. You'd be able to say like, oh, I'm setting height, and why is setting height function taking up so much time? Without this, you might be putting timers on everything. You wouldn't be able to narrow it down to whatever function, but this does just that. It narrows down which functions and also kind of shows you how that breaks down the relationships of this function called this function that calls this function, and you lost time along the way. Okay, cool. And then the last thing I want to touch upon is this experimental feature called layers. Now, let's shift over to this. Okay. Lately, I've been doing a lot of performance work on making something scroll smooth, even though something inside the scroll container just got a ton of stuff on it. Right? How do I make it scroll smoother, faster? How do I trick the browser to put something in a hardware accelerated layer? And this type of experimental tooling is kind of on the way of trying to help you out in that fashion. You have these DOM elements. They've got to be rendered somehow to the screen, but there's a lot of different ways it could get rendered. It can go into the hardware accelerated graphics buffer, or it could be just rendered out in software, right? That's what the browser makes that decision for you. But you can do certain things to kind of push it toward the hardware accelerated if you needed to do that. And so this panel shows you all these different hardware accelerated layers, and you can select it on this right-hand side by selecting, clicking on whatever layer, and it will tell you where that layer is coming from. In this case, this thing that I've selected, as I said, experimental. Okay. Wow, I don't know how I accidentally did that. Okay, I wanted to select this one. All right, there we go. You can tell that this layer is coming from this particular CSS element, or HTML element, but described with this CSS selector. And so that gives you a jumping off point to say like, okay, this DOM element or whatever, this has got its own layer. And then you can look on the right-hand side and you can get some insight on why. Right? Again, this is experimental. I know they're working on trying to improve some of these messages. Right? Oh, that's kind of cool. I didn't know it showed that. So highlight over some of the reasons. It might give you a little bit more information. I don't know if it's useful or not. Assumed overlap. It doesn't have a tooltip for that. So this is one kind of neat tool that I've been using a lot to try to get a lot of my rendering and DOM node compositing over to hardware accelerated, because I can easily pop into here, figure out why this DOM node is not getting its own layer. It's not getting its own layer because whatever, because I have overflow out of it, whatever. This one is, and it's because I have this horrible hack called Transform Z, stuff like that.
I don't know if it was hardware accelerated or rendered in software, or I mean, does it? Where do you see the performance measures? Or
oh, where do you see the performance back? Okay, so backing up, like I would start in a timeline, and I would do some scrolling and see, like, okay, yeah, I'm outside of 60 frames per second. It's kind of like what we did over here, and then it'd be the next. Okay, and so I would see maybe something like a green bar or a purple bar, meaning, so the colors associated with this. So yellow is JavaScript, green is compositing and painting, and purple is layout. Okay, and so where the hardware accelerated part comes in is compositing layers. You want to push as much as you want to compositing layers because it's going to just be rendering really fast, right? And so in my particular situation at work was I noticed that it was painting a lot, not compositing a lot. And so then it's like, well, okay, why isn't it getting its own layer? Then you would pop into this layers panel, try to find out, why isn't it getting its own layer? And then you try some CSS voodoo tricks and see if you can get it to be on its own layer, be on its own layer, and then verify your work by popping into the timeline. Do whatever what was janky now is nice and smooth, and everything's a 60 frames per second. So that's kind of my work.
So a candidate for a hardware acceleration would be having that particular part of the code in its own layer, right?
Yeah,
As a
that makes
candidate,
sense.
say,
Yeah, right.
So that was a big we were saying.
Okay. So that's essentially the end of my talk and all the tips that I have right now that I could fit in. One question that's always been asked is, how do you stay current with all this? Because it's changing all the time, right? Just like you're saying, like, I didn't have that in mind, but it just showed up like yesterday or whatever, I tend to follow all of these Chrome evangelists, and this is why I kind of love Chrome and Google, is they're willing to spend a lot of money on paying people to just work with the community. That's all they do. They don't necessarily work on Chrome or Chrome dev tools, they just work with people. So some big names there: Paul Irish, Maria Gregor, Eddie Osamani, Paul Lewis, Jay Garfield, and NetDucka. NetDucka is mostly focused on graphics, from my understanding. And then on the bottom, just other great rock star front-end devs that I follow on Twitter or whatever, and see what they're talking about. So, anywho, thanks for listening to me blabber about Chrome dev tools. Hope you learned something.
Google Canary is nightly, and you can run it parallel with any other version. And there's 3 channels that they offer, which is stable, beta, and dev. So
outside of Canary.
Outside of Canary.
Oh, okay.
So there's 4, but you could run Canary alongside any of those other 3. But once you have dev, you have dev. You can't test that dev and stable. And then on top of this, Paul Irish, and I think it's Addy on Google Chrome Developer Tools on Google+. They do weekly hangouts and live events, and they archive them too. And some of them are really good, like what he was showing with the layers. I saw that, but I didn't have it yet. And what he was doing is people had emailed or chatted in and said, go to this URL and having a performance problem, and they would like right there on the fly, like just go right into it and say, oh, well, here's your problem, dog. It's awesome. And I don't think that that's what the whole show is about, but they do that every now and then. They'll just have people tell me what your problem is and point us to the site and we'll try to help. And I learn a lot. They go really, really fast, but they're all archived on YouTube as well. So, and then one other thing I had that you didn't talk about, and I wonder if you use it, because I use it all the time, is Control S in the source panel, or Command S, I guess it would be. Which to me, for not only for development, but for hacking shitty sites that like put an overlay over the top, or they do some JavaScript bullshit to try to prevent you from seeing the data, I can just go into their JavaScript source code, modify it, and hit Control S. And you can show it. I mean, I think you've used it before.
So
it's powerful.
For example, okay, so
It actually, he's going to show it to you, but it actually compiles it.
So every time I click A, I'm calling, I'm actually calling this function, but we could just copy patch that or library it. Oh. Recompilation and updates. Okay. Huh. I don't know what that's all about.
Did it work? Because it looks like you have a little asterisk by your,
What's the warning?
and you have a warning too.
Don't listen to ours with
It'll save it not on the server or on your desktop. It will save it in the DOM, I guess, or in the compiler of Chrome, and then you can run it. You don't have to refresh the page. So what I use it for a lot is when I'm having a JavaScript problem, instead of going back to the IDE and making a change and then redeploying it. My stuff's on the server. It's not like I'm running on localhost. So I'll go on the server and I'll make a whole bunch of code changes and keep hitting Control S and testing out my changes to see if I get it to work. And then when I got it, I'll just copy it and put it into my IDE.
Yeah, no, usually that does work for me too.
Yeah, maybe because you're on
like
Canary.
Canary.
But that little asterisk he's got up there by the file name lets you know that you have unsaved changes, and if you Control S or Command S, it'll save it. I've done it like on public websites all the time. My favorite thing to do is when people send out photos sites, say, oh, look at my kids' photos. I try to hack them and try to figure out how they're doing the stuff to protect the photos. And this is one of the awesome tools, because you can go on any public website that doesn't minimize their code. Even if they do, if you're smart enough to get in there and do it anyway, you could really do some pretty crazy stuff.
I guess that's a good lead to my question, because one of my annoyances I find with going through stack traces and inspecting variables is with closure variables. So like if I'm in a inner function of a closure and I want to access the outer function's closure variables, if I didn't explicitly declare that variable as being used in the inner function, Chrome doesn't give me access to it.
Yeah,
I know you know it's there. But I guess if you use Control S, you can maybe just add it as a
On the fly
yeah. Into the function signature instead of going back to the code and like adding a declaration to it just so I can get access to it in debugging.
Yeah, so I was actually going to mention this, but I didn't have time to make the slide. There is a huge gotcha. So let's say you have a breakpoint like right here, and this somehow gets called, D gets called, or whatever. What he's saying is like when the Chrome DevTools drops you into the breakpoint on line 40, well, okay, you can see it. You won't have access to A, B, and C, and from my understanding, it's a V8 optimization. It just optimized those variables out because it saw that in this function in the code, you did not access A, B, and C. So I'm not going to keep track of it because I'm just going to make your code run faster. But then it makes debugging a little bit tougher.
I got a question. So today I was playing with something and it had something that looks like a couple of paint. So you wiggle over it and then there's flashing squares all over the place. And it looks like there's things laying on top of each other, like CSS was there's something on top of something else on top of something else. Is there a way of digging in? And like, because I want to select something and inspect it, but I always get the top layer.
Oh, you want the thing right below it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one thing you could do is
Without having to dig into the tree.
so yeah, I mean, like if something is like let's say this is obscuring, this is on top, and you want to get to below it. I mean, you could easily just click on it in the elements panel and hit H, and that just kind of hides it, and then you can do inspect again. So you just like hidden that layer. So I don't care about this layer. Now let's go to the next So, I mean, it'll still
Yeah.
be, you know, probably a couple iterations if there's like multiple overlapping
Yeah.
layers, but that's one way to do it.
I know in like, graphic programs, you hit Control Shift click and it goes and starts selecting elements underneath this, the Z order, basically.
That would be cool. I don't think that's the way.
That's a good trick.
What do you think is the benefit of this over Firebug?
I don't know. I haven't spent too much time in Firebug, but and this kind of just goes like any framework or tool that I use. I see them putting a lot of resources into developing dev tools. Firebug, I think, is defunct.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I think Mozilla's still investing.
Oh, well, but it's not under the heading of Firebug, it's built into Firefox.
I think it's built in now. I think they took
Yeah.
it over and now they're investing time in it, kind of like Google, but not as many.
Exactly.
And then Chrome as a browser, do you guys feel like that's a better browser than Firefox in terms of
Flame war.
yeah,
I do.
Develop it all. Like if I spend most of my time in a browser developing with Chrome, speed or functionality.
I think it all depends on like